Thank you for joining us at the 10th anniversary edition of EXPO Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Butowski, Programming Director, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on the current issues that engage them. This year, EXPO Chicago is proud to present the return of the Directors Summit, a program that invites a diverse group of emerging art museum leaders from across the United States for a 3-day program addressing the shifting dynamics of museum leadership today. Shaped in partnership with museum consultant Jill Snyder, a seasoned museum leader, the Directors Summit is centered on 2 public roundtable discussions on the dialogue stage, the second of which you're seeing today. The roundtable discussions will explore how new institutional systems lead to enduring structural changes and promote inclusivity. Today's panelists will share their lived experiences, experiments, and new pathways forward. A very special thank you to our partners at Sotheby's, Risk Strategies, and the University Club of Chicago for making this entire program possible. Please welcome Jill to the stage to introduce the panelists involved in our second roundtable conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's a great honor to grow this program. And I would like to bring onto the stage our panelists today. So please join me in welcoming Nora Burnett Abrams from the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver. Ellegood from the Institute of Contemporary Art in LA. And Virginia Shearer from the Sarasota Art Museum at Ringling College of Art and Design. You ready?
Let's do it.
Good. So it's a great honor to grow this program, now thriving in its second year. And one way that we can, or ways in which we can measure the success of the Directors Summit is, for one, it forges a meaningful bond among a leadership cohort. And I think you know this is a cohort that also, yesterday, we had our first panel, which included 4 museum directors, including Courtney Martin from the Yale Center for British Art and Daisy DesRosiers from the Gunn Gallery at Kenyon College, Claudio Rodriguez at the Bronx Museum, and Veronica Roberts from the Cantor Art Center at Stanford University. So this is part 2 of that conversation. If we've learned one thing during these past few years, it's that we need one another. And second, by design, the roundtables bring into the public realm conversations that require a refreshing measure of candor and vulnerability, which centers on our shared humanity. And lastly, the Directors Summit illuminates the emotional weight of institutional change that falls heavily, very often, at the feet of directors. So by placing our focus on an emerging generation of museum leaders, the Directors Summit looks forward with hope. These leaders are rising in a moment of urgency, yet they're playing the long game necessary for real change. We will hear today, as we did yesterday, about their inspiring, creative, entrepreneurial, often risk-taking initiatives to upend institutional inequities. So given our 1-hour time limit, I've asked each of them to share an initiative that reflects structural and systemic change. And following these presentations, I'll moderate a conversation among them, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And so, with that, let's begin with Nora.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Excuse me, I want to just, before I get into deeper into a presentation and conversation, I want to just thank Jill profusely for inviting me to be a part of this. It is a true honor to be on stage with all of you women and with the other members of this cohort, and it's been such an enriching and illuminating experience thus far in Chicago. So I'm extremely grateful. Thank you, first and foremost. So I am the Mark G. Falcone Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. I took on this role in August of 2019, and prior to becoming the director, I was the institution's chief curator. I like to say that I was born at MCA Denver because I've been there for 13 years. No gray hairs at all. And I've really come to know and feel enormously proud to be a part of such a, I think, intensely rigorous and imaginative organization. When I took on the role of director, and in fact, when I was even interviewing for the role, I presented to the board a vision for how I saw the museum living in the world in the future. And that was very much with an idea of becoming a more decentralized museum, of living more as a network rather than a central beacon to which everyone magnetically would be drawn. Instead, I really imagined the possibility of MCA Denver, and frankly of museums in general, maybe contemporary art museums specifically, of really not feeling so beholden to a traditional model of a museum existing within four walls, but really thinking more expansively, thinking beyond the walls, so to speak. COVID, I think, in many ways helped us imagine that in more real terms because of how we started to live in the cloud. But my intention was really to think about living in different parts of the city in different ways and being able to engage meaningfully with audiences that compelled us to think, act, create, and imagine differently, to forge better, more real and authentic connections with audiences in those different spaces. So in the fall of 2020, in a moment when the idea of taking on another space seemed extremely, I can't even say high risk because we were barely coming together in our own building. Why would we think about taking on another space? So I'm going to say it was bold, but many people thought it was the opposite of that. But we had an opportunity where a historic theater in a different part of Denver, it's called the Holiday Theater, which dates to 1926 when it was originally called the Egyptian. And you can see some of the murals that have been restored inside the theater that kind of play on that theme, if you will. It was titled the Egyptian because of the discovery of King Tut's tomb at the time. But in any case, the Holiday Theater was a venue where we had done a lot of large-scale programs pre-pandemic. We loved the space. It had wonderful character. It was 400 seats, had this beautiful silver screen, and it was housed within a larger facility that told us about 18,000 square feet, including some residences and some other storefront spaces. And this is just another view of the theater. What I was really interested in was an opportunity to be able to program the theater, and not just program it, but to live there in as creative and kind of imaginatively as possible. And so in working with some of my very ingenious board members, I'm going to make a very long story as short as I possibly can, but essentially, a nonprofit entity called the Denver Cultural Property Trust was formed, which acquired this entire facility, including the residences and the storefront spaces, as well as the theater. And because it had some traditional and non-traditional lenders, the trust was formed, again, as a nonprofit, so not trying to maximize as much as they could get from rents of its tenants. Instead, they had a very conservative rate of return that they were offering to their lenders, and that enabled them to offer the space to us at a below market rate. So we were able to take on a 7-year lease with 2 additional terms. So we're looking at a 21-year, at least, commitment to being in this space. And we can do so in an extremely affordable way. And again, it's because we don't own it, but a trust comprising a number of individuals who care deeply about preserving space for cultural organizations in our city because of the recognition that any thriving city has a thriving arts and culture ecosystem within it, that they have preserved this space. It's not going to become Orange Theory Fitness. It's not going to become a brew pub. It is I would say for the very foreseeable future, going to be committed and dedicated to supporting creative practice, cultural production, and the presentation of creative life, if you will. So we were extremely excited. And there's a phrase that I like to say that really describes pretty much everything we do at MCA Denver, which is building the ship while we're sailing it. And this was no different. For a variety of reasons, the real estate transaction, the trust acquiring the space, had to happen in a very quick amount of time. So it had to be completed within about 6 months from when we had identified it as a as an idea even. And so I'm very grateful to our board for getting behind this idea very quickly. And I think that the ideas that we had about how we imagined living in the holiday with the neighbors, within the neighborhood, embedding in a community. And I should say that it's a community, it's on the north side of Denver. It's directly across the street from North High School, which is one of the 4 central high schools in the city. Excuse me, and it's a historically Latinx and Chicanx community. It has experienced massive gentrification over the last 20 years. And there was, amongst some kind of longstanding community members, definitely some resistance to MCA taking on this lease and becoming a more active programmatic voice, if you will, in the neighborhood. And we commenced, as soon as we knew that that this was actually going to happen, we had really started to build a lot of relationships, or I would say deepen relationships, and begin a lot of conversations with different community members, neighbors, artists especially, and also some other kind of service providers, if you will, from the neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that did not have a strong cultural hub, and so we were able to put forward a vision for how we wanted and continue to want to live there, that I will just run through really quickly, that really is about advancing the mission of MCA Denver. But again, it's this idea of living as a more networked organization rather than as a central entity that magnetically lures everyone to it. Instead, we're thinking about living at the holiday as an opportunity to absolutely deepen the ways in which we engage different communities around the holiday, around the museum, and are informed by them as much as we kind of will put forward our own programs, but that there's also a lot of community-driven ideas. For example, we have a holiday advisory cabinet, which is like an advisory board, if you will, that is already starting to program on behalf of various community members and neighbors. And the whole idea is, okay, I'm running out of time. Whole idea is to essentially not just live as a decentralized museum in terms of our space, but also how we program. So we see it as obviously expanding our program, growing the audiences for cultural life across the city, because just the sheer volume of what we're doing has grown tremendously, and also supporting artists in being able to support their creative practice more fully. As we all know, there are very few visual artists who are exclusively visual artists. Many of them are in a band, or they're chefs, or they have a clothing line, or whatever it is. This allows us another platform to further amplify their voice and their work. And then lastly, of course, the business side of it is an opportunity to increase earned revenue through events, programs, and other ways of becoming a kind of welcoming space for the public. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're on tight timelines. Forgive me, I'm going to read in order to stay within my time frame. This will help me from wandering off too much. But I want to thank Jill also for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here among this incredible cohort, and thank everyone from EXPO for their attention to all of us and making us feel so welcome. So I am from ICALA, the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, which was founded in 1988 as the Santa Monica Museum of Art and moved to downtown Los Angeles in 2017. I joined the museum in September of 2019. So I've been there for 3.5 years. The initiative that I'm going to share with you today is actually not exclusive to my institution, as you will see, but was very much inspired by the challenges of running a mid-sized arts institution today. LAVA is a coalition of Los Angeles-based small to mid-sized nonprofit visual arts organizations dedicated to a culture of mutual support and ensuring each other's welfare through fundraising, information, and resource sharing and collective advocacy. I'll give you a little origin story. In March 2020, we all remember that month well, when the pandemic hit, I reached out to Megan Steinman, who was then the executive director at the Underground Museum, simply to ask how she was doing and to suggest that maybe we meet with some other EDs in the city to see how they were doing and coping. In that unprecedented moment in which we were all grappling with so much uncertainty, though ICLA had a budget 3 times that of the Underground Museum and other small organizations, I really felt most aligned with these smaller organizations that I knew were the most vulnerable at that moment. Organizations without an endowment or even reserve funding that have to raise their budgets each and every year, operate with very few employees typically, and simply just have fewer safety nets. We invited Hamza Walker from LAX Art to join the conversation, Sarah Russin from the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, and others to join on what became a weekly Zoom call. And we quickly started inviting more organizations to join the conversation. Our weekly online sessions together were an opportunity to share information and resources, but also to share our feelings at a time of enormous stress in which we were all concerned and overwhelmed, to put it mildly. But in many ways unable to share these feelings with our staff and board members as we tried to portray resiliency and hopefulness. We quickly recognized the value in establishing a formal professional coalition so that we could continue to find mechanisms of mutual support and advocacy. We invited more organizations with a desire that LAVA reflect the diversity of our sector and our city and the audiences that we serve. As of today, the LAVA Coalition is a group of 34 nonprofit visual art spaces who together represent a large and vital sector of the Los Angeles arts ecosystem. So what do we do? LAVA has established 4 areas of focus that guide our work together: advocacy for our sector, fundraising initiatives and financial planning, capacity and infrastructure, and programmatic collaborations. I could elaborate on all of these. There's a lot in each of them. But I'm going to focus today on the fundraising. So LAVA is committed to the long-term vitality of all of our organizations. Our goal from the beginning was not only to survive COVID, but to thrive going forward. To that end, we designed 3 fundraising programs to support and sustain our sector. I think we're already here. Capacity building and infrastructure support. Small organizations, as those of you who run them know, are often lacking in particular staff positions and entire departments, creating real challenges to our operations and ability to support our employees. To fill in some of these gaps, LAVA has raised funds to bring in professionals as guest speakers and to facilitate multi-session workshops in the areas of fundraising, human resources, marketing and communications, and board governance. By ensuring that all member organizations have access to these services, we are building more equity across our sector. Economic recovery and sustainability. The standard models for fundraising often pit organizations against each other for a limited number of grant opportunities and a relatively small pool of generous donors. This fundraising tier argues that our organizations are mutually interdependent and essential for the arts ecosystem as a whole to thrive. The economic recovery and sustainability fundraising offers each participating organization a one-time deposit of $50,000 toward their general operating costs. And lastly, healthcare for every employee. Healthcare benefits are a cost that many member organizations are simply unable to afford. However, we feel it is ethical and essential to center care for our employees, many of whom interface with the public, with the healthcare benefits that all of us deserve, especially at a time when a global pandemic has laid bare the terrible inequities in healthcare access in our country. The goal of the healthcare fundraising is to provide each member organization with $500 a month per staff member, both full-time and part-time, to cover the healthcare costs. I'm proud to share with you today that as of today, LAVA has raised over $2.6 million. Oh, thank you. In January, we were able to distribute $50,000 to each participating organization, no matter their scale. For some organizations, this represents nearly 25% of their annual operating costs. For others, like me, it's a small portion of what we need to raise every year, but for all of us, it's a significant influx of cash at a moment when fundraising continues to be an ever-present pressure. Most importantly, this funding is unrestricted, so executive directors and their teams are able to decide how they will use those funds in whatever way is most essential to them. At this time, we are also preparing to distribute approximately $30,000 to each member organization to go toward healthcare and staff care. As every executive director of a small arts organization likely heard in the darkest days of COVID, a common shared sentiment from funders was the idea that many organizations would not survive the pandemic, that we would close our doors. Throughout our conversations, we emphatically tried to change this narrative, arguing that it was imperative that we all survive, and we must work collectively to ensure that that becomes a reality. 3 years into this pandemic, I'm very happy to say that only one organization has closed its doors, and that's the Underground Museum. And this was not a decision made for financial or governance issues, but rather a personal decision made with great care by the founders. We believe the fundraising success we've had is proof that a new model of shared fundraising is not only possible, but benefits every participant in the arts ecosystem. And we hope that it can be more widely adopted. We are offering the opportunity to funders to make their impact felt more broadly across our entire sector. Indeed, it's an opportunity for all of us to redefine how people think about arts and culture in our communities. We believe that we are stronger together and that we have the power as a collective body to fortify our sector and to make permanent changes. Thank you.
Well, I echo Anne and Nora's sentiments. Thank you so much, Jill, for inviting me to participate, and it's been so amazing to get to know you both and the incredible work that you're doing and all of our cohort. I'm Virginia Shearer. I'm from Sarasota Art Museum in Sarasota, Florida. We're part of Ringling College of Art and Design. And I'm the newest director to the cohort, I think. Maybe Veronica, a little bit newer. I've been in my role since August of 2021. I joined a museum that was 16 years in the making. 13 founders in Sarasota, Florida saw a niche, an opportunity for a platform for contemporary art, and joined forces with Ringling College of Art and Design back in 2005. And over a 16-year period, there was an amazing community groundswell of participation, of volunteerism, of resourcing to get to this gorgeous museum that opened in December of 2019. Can you imagine a worse time to open a museum? A stunning repurpose of a 1926 iconic building that was a beloved high school right in the center of Sarasota. So as many of us closed down, this museum closed in March of 2020 and then was closed for an extended period of time. So when I came into the museum from another museum that was used to getting quite robust attendance, over 500,000 visitors a year, I came into a space that looked like this every day. And I remember those early days telling our workers, all of our staff, it's going to change, it's going to get better, we're going to put a lot of things in place here. And we got creative. So we invited Stephen and William Ladd, who are brothers from St. Louis, Missouri. They're based in Brooklyn, New York. They make art purposefully with communities. They've been doing this for more than 20 years. they have their own solo practice as well. So we did an exhibition this past fall called Lead with a Laugh, Stephen and William Ladd. And then we also brought Stephen and William to the museum to help us ignite partnerships, because that was one of the key ingredients that was really missing from our operation, was key partnerships. And we took a year to establish relationships. And these are relationships with All Star Children's Foundation that serves children in the foster care system, also youth for LGBTQI, young people, the Alzheimer's Association of Sarasota, the Memory Unit at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, Easter Seals, the New College of Florida Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department, the Gulf Coast Latin Chamber. We spent a year forging these wonderful relationships that all led up to a week-long extravaganza of art making, community, and then exhibition of a collaborative masterwork in our galleries. And it was so fun and so rewarding, and really a testimony to what can be done to ignite a spark with our community. And then we brought the artists in for many different discussions, conversations, and to help us to continue to forge those relationships. And what we found is that our public, as we all know, everyone's coming to our museums with their lived experience, with something that they're bringing that maybe is not something they can check at the door. And many times that might be the frustrations that have happened that day, that might be the kinds of things that they're burdened with. For example, what we're finding in a community that is largely retirees, standing and listening to gallery talks, hearing impairments, visual loss. A lot of these kinds of things are coming with our visitors to the museum. And we learned a lot of that through this relationship with the Ladds. And we also had a couple of wonderful, wonderful, and very important conversations and teachable moments with our visitors. Hearing from parents directly, children on the autism spectrum, learning how we could do better as a new museum to really live into our values. So we are working very hard right now and very closely on a new initiative that will enable us to train all of our staff to be more responsive and more successful at working with people with differing abilities, working with people with disabilities, working with people who are looking for more from our museum, and really providing our staff with the proper training to be able to meet our audiences where they are. So we've developed a partnership with these folks on the slide that you can see, and then we're growing additional partnerships. So we're working with Embracing Our Differences, which is an amazing organization in Sarasota that has worked with communities, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the heart of their work for more than 20 years. We're figuring out how we can listen more with our partners at Easter Seals and develop more programming. And then we're also working with our partners at Ringling College of Art and Design. One of the things that we've been hearing directly from our college partners is the mental health situation, the mental health moment that we're all living in. Students are reporting really alarming statistics around their own health and well-being, especially in art and design colleges. So our artists of the future are actually, in a nationwide study, less than 30% are saying that they're flourishing, they're happy, they're healthy. And so we're working with the mental health community to help us find tools for all of our frontline staff, but all of our staff, to be more accommodating, welcoming, and really live our values for accessibility and inclusion. So we're just getting started. We're just bringing together a nucleus of partners, and we're really looking forward to creating something that we hope we can share, we hope we can scale, but something that really transforms our museum experience for all of our visitors. And that is where we are right now.
Well, thank you, three of you. Such inspiring stories. And so I have a few questions to get the dialogue going. I want to ask Nora and Anne, your two examples had you creating more horizontal structure relationships, particularly yours, Anne, this kind of diversified partnership. You know, I've never seen a partnership of 30 plus entities. I mean, it's pretty impressive, the whole management of it. And Nora, you are an institution, this idea of not being the beacon and being more of a network and going out into community to see how you can be in a more iterative and responsive kind of. Can you talk a bit about the power dynamics of that a little bit more explicitly as a leader? And you know, often in these occasions, I think especially art museums, there's a perception of elitism or being in the power seat. How do you, in order to model a different, more horizontal structure, what does that challenge you as leaders to do and to lead your teams?
Sure, I'm happy to start on that. I think, you know, whenever you go from the 50,000-foot view of ideas to the 10-foot reality of making it work and building something, you know, you experience a range of opportunities and challenges. And so I think for us, in a sense, to live as a networked, decentralized museum, again, the pandemic kind of opened that up in terms of we obviously all of us had to live virtually or, you know, through our digital channels, which offered a whole new way of thinking through engagement and program and supporting artists and supporting their practice, as well as finding ways to connect with audiences, and not just those in Denver, of course, but all around the world. So I think we had started to kind of flex some of those muscles, if you will, or even maybe develop some of those muscles. And we are continuing very much to develop those muscles as we grow into the holiday. And what I mean by that is, I think that we have some clear ideas around how we want our programming that is going to be produced and that we are organizing at the holiday. And we also have really clear ideas of how we want to partner and how we want to collaborate and how we want to embark on conversations with potential partners, and how we want to develop those relationships and how open we are to those relationships developing in whatever ways they naturally will. And so we're both kind of initiating and also very much receiving feedback and commentary and really thoughtful proposals from a number of different programming partners who we never would have been able to work with if we were just thinking about, you know, our downtown building. And so, again, because we're learning so much as we're going, there isn't a clear roadmap, right? Like, we're building that roadmap alongside a lot of the partners that we're working with, and that has to come with the grace and humility to say I don't have all the answers, that I don't presume to know where this is going to lead, and to really decenter ourselves, and I mean that like all of MCA, in those conversations in order to make it more porous and to make the conversation far more, to invite more fingerprints on whatever we develop and together. So that means that we have to also not enter into a partnership knowing what the outcome is going to be, and that's a different shift, no doubt. You know, as a leader, you want, you know, oftentimes you say, well, I want to do this, and then I want to do that, and then we're going to end up here, and then that's going to be great, and you just have to surrender that, which is scary and also extremely exhilarating.
Just before we move on, how does that affect your funding? I mean, in my experience, often when you're going out to funders to support new initiatives, they want to know what the outcomes are. How are you going to measure it? How do you know if success looks like? And the model you're saying is not sure. You know, we're taking risk, it's entrepreneurial, the outcomes are yet to be determined. So how are you shifting, how are you controlling that kind of narrative?
Well, I would say that we have a track record of doing things that people weren't sure how it was going to end up. And so I think there's a little bit of trust and faith in that. Yes, exactly. I think also people are excited by what we do because they don't know, because we are unpredictable, so to speak, at least creatively, let's say, not necessarily like with our financing. But I think that's what electrifies a lot of funders because they see that we are trying new things and that we're not beholden to a model that maybe was working but could be working better. And I think, for example, we've launched a kind of like a workforce development program for what we call emerging adults, 18 to 26-year-olds who are college age, not necessarily college bound. And we are, it's a 7-week kind of paid internship where they have their own cohort of 24 peers, and they're introduced to professional artists, creatives from other kind of non-visual arts or performing arts industries and fields. At the end of it, there's seed money that is available when they do a kind of pitch to a panel. They receive some funding to support an idea or initiative that they want to launch. And the whole possibility of it was really made possible by having this other space where we could bring people together, where we could conduct these kinds of more thorough internship type programs. And we were able to receive funding from other sources that we would have never been eligible for because we weren't conceiving of those programs. So on the one hand, maybe there's some people who say that is too risky. Who knows where this is going to evolve to? I want to kind of step back, though that frankly hasn't happened. But the other positive side of it is that we really are welcoming new supporters, new friends who really are getting behind what the opportunity of the holiday is enabling.
Oh gosh, I forgot the question, but
It was about power dynamics and how,
and how,
you kind of, from the front end of your presentation, you said your budget was triple many of the smaller ones, but you felt more akin and aligned with them in spirit, in terms of vulnerability, and yet you forged this quite expansive network. And so, how did the power dynamics evolve in that whole relationship?
Yeah, I think the beauty of Lava and the challenge is that we're starting something from scratch. And so we can set those parameters from the beginning. It's a completely horizontal organization. It's a coalition, so we all have our own institutions to run. We have no desire to usurp what we're each doing in our own institutions, but this is an opportunity for us all to come together to pursue certain things as shared goals. And so we have not to date created a governing body within LAVA. We imagine that might be needed at some point as the coalition grows. We do have committees. So we have a fundraising committee, we have a programming committee, and we now have a governance committee. And I feel like I'm forgetting one. Marketing and communications. So certain people in the coalition are volunteering to help in these areas. And I think what I'm noticing that's happening, which is wonderful, is that a lot of those of us who have been in the biz many years really stepped up to do the fundraising, and some of us also are involved in other committees. And it was a learning opportunity for some of the younger EDs also to just, participate in that as well. But as we have been around a little longer and as we're moving into some of the governance conversations, a lot of the younger EDs are stepping up and wanting to participate in that particular committee. And they have really, really amazing ideas. And I feel like I'm now learning so much from them because many of them are committed to forms of sort of negotiation and certain kinds of best practices and institutions that, of course, we're all thinking and talking about, but they're bringing to the table in some cases, much more radical ways of operating and ways of making decisions, and a lot of desire to remain horizontal within that and to not create hierarchies among the coalition itself. I will mention, just because fundraising was the focus of most of what I talked about, that those power dynamics, one of the things that's been incredible about the Lava Coalition is that, and this really comes out of being in a pandemic, is that everyone we've asked to come and speak to us as a coalition has agreed. And that goes from people working at the Department of Cultural Affairs to, a program officer at the Mellon Foundation or at the Ford. And people have been very open and receptive to having the conversation. And we've gotten some amazing people to come forward and to support us. But there's also been a lot of really, really hard conversations, because it's very clear that for a lot of funders, and I'm talking about individuals and in some cases foundations, for as much change as we've seen over the last 3 years and a willingness to move in slightly different directions, it's still quite conservative. And it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around the idea of just giving a bucket of money to 34 different organizations when they don't necessarily know all of us. So those conversations about, we have invited other organizations to join this coalition. This is about community and about advocating for each other and making the argument that, in fact, what you're supporting is the ecosystem, not the individual orgs so much. And to try to change that kind of mindset is definitely a challenge. And there's a power dynamic in that. But again, we're also trying to change the power dynamic to say, some of these organizations in the coalition could never get on a call with these foundations or with some of these funders, but together they're in the room. And that has been incredible, because we've been able to introduce some of these funders to some of these very, very small organizations in Los Angeles who are, though small in scale, doing incredible work and sometimes more embedded in their communities in very direct ways than the larger institutions in town. So it's a learning opportunity for these funders as well, whether we get the grant or not. And in many cases, we didn't get it. No money was forthcoming. But we're teaching, everyone we talk to, I think.
So Virginia, you talked about this daunting challenge of coming into a new museum at a difficult time, forging its relevance to the community, right? And coming up with these remarkable network of partnerships, very much based on empathy, of meeting the visitor where they are and really understanding a kind of universal idea. But you also didn't talk about that you're part of a college. And so you are toggling between making relevance to a community and relevance, making the case to a college, who is, in a way, your umbrella structure. So, as if it's not hard enough, could you talk a little bit about the challenges of toggling back and forth? And at one point, just to remind you, you had talked about, when you were talking about centered around this particular issue around people with disabilities and trying to be more empathy-centered, that you actually leverage some resources within the college. So maybe you can talk about how you're using the college as a resource, not only serving them, but the resources that they bring.
Sure. No, I really appreciate that. And I know my colleagues can appreciate this too. Our museum is located a couple of miles down the road from the college. So there's also a kind of barrier for students, a barrier for faculty. And also, I think, the work, Courtney's doing at Yale Center for British Arts and other museums are doing to teach object-based teaching at the undergraduate level and then have that flow through is so critically important, because that is often not the DNA, especially among studio artists and studio art professors. So we have a high bar, and we're working really hard on extending our, kind of welcome mat back to the college, finding ways to bring the students in, ways to get the faculty engaged, beyond showing their own work. There's that academic museums can and must do in our to our great fortune, Ringling College of Art and Design takes showing work very seriously. So they have 6 endowed galleries. So that's not really our responsibility. Our responsibility is to give back to the community and to get the students in to see the greatest works of art we can possibly share with them and to meet practicing artists. So in terms of, building empathy and finding ways that our students can connect more, we're hiring them in as many places at the museum as we possibly can. So resources flowing back to students, trying to help build, some systems to get them to understand more about how our museum can serve the campus and back and forth. And we're tapping directly into the counseling center at the college, which is just phenomenal and a great resource and is helping us understand, how the challenges that if you look at just the microcosm of students, you can really extrapolate for what all of our visitors are going through, and loneliness in particular being just a great debilitating force right now. And so really thinking about how engagement and activity and welcoming, being a gathering place, can help inoculate against loneliness. So we don't have all the answers. We're just really trying to make sure that we address the questions and address them in a very demonstrative way.
Thank you. I know we want to move to questions, but I have almost a philosophical question. I wish all 7 of you were up here, because as I've been hearing about your initiatives, which are in many ways, as we had made as the focus of this series of panels, is about challenging systems and structures to try to create more inclusive, equitable institutions. It strikes me that the kind of the ingredient that is the most kind of the paradigm shift is the ingredient of time. Either the time in terms of playing the long game, or even to do an initiative and having the patience and the resources to play out an experiment, to take a risk. And so my question to you is, if you could wave your magic wand and speak to all the stakeholders who mattered most, what would you say in terms of what do you need in terms of time?
I think for us, what we need in terms of time is just the opportunity to develop more and more mutually affirming relationships with other partners. So the intention was never that at the holiday it would just be MCA Denver Productions. Like, a huge part of the vision is to invite into the programmatic conversation a number of other voices, both from the community where we're sited as well as from around the city and well beyond, to feel really excited by and to take hold of the opportunity to mount something, whatever that might be. And so I think for me, the time is just the time to grow and develop authentically and richly the relationships with those partners. Some are well underway, of course, and were before we even took on the holiday, but the whole intention is to broaden that, and so that takes time.
Anne?
Oh, gosh, we just need more hours in the day, don't we, all?
That alone is a good
I'll
answer.
take that also.
Every day. I would just say, when we founded Lava...
But could I just sort of, for a moment, say, does that mean, is one of the answers that you're taking on too much? Like, the business
yes.
model is based on generating a return on investment, right? So it's about product and events and exhibitions and, generating. So what happens if you slow down?
Well, I'll die. No, but what I was going to say about Lava is that when we founded it, it was so urgent. I mean, we were all, we didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, no one in the world did, right? We didn't know when we were going to reopen. We didn't know. And for some of us, we were more vulnerable than others in terms of, would we survive? We're through that now, thank God. And I think, in the slowing down of that urgency also becomes the reflection and the planning for the future. So even the decision to continue lava, lava started as really just something to do in the moment. We didn't envision it initially as an ongoing coalition. There was a certain point where we all kind of looked at each other and said, why didn't this exist before? Why did it take a pandemic to put us all together? And what kinds of things can we do past the pandemic, quote unquote, to just continue to be in support and care of each other as, like-minded organizations. And the truth is that we really tried to get away from a lot of that pandemic language at a certain point. Let's stop talking about this as if, there is this kind of super urgent, timely energy to everything. And let's start to just really think carefully and in a considered way as a group about what do we want to work on and what do we want to work toward. And so I would say the whole kind of energy and time feeling of it has shifted. And that's been really nice.
I think on that point, the idea of going from facing the existential threat to embedding these, or embedding the network as a long-term commitment is going from short-term kind of urgency, right, to long-term, this is how we're all going to thrive, is a magnificent shift that I think is those values in action. It's like we're not doing this because it's expedient. We're doing this because it is 100% the most honest and I want to say just thing to do, but essentially the same thing.
Any quick response before we go to the...
I would also say time to reflect. There's an urgency coming out of COVID. We are building the planes and flying them at the same time, but we are really, still grappling with relevance and really helping people understand why we matter. And so that's stressful. And it's also doesn't leave a lot of time for reflection and then feeling, you're putting what you learned back into the practice. So reflective time.
Thank you all. I think we have, we want to turn over to any questions from the audience now.
Thank you. This question is for Anne. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you're balancing the fundraising of LAVA and the fund that's coming through that with each organization's independent fundraising campaigns.
Sure. Great question. It's tricky, but I think it's also proven to work. We each, of course, have to fundraise for our own organizations. And so from the very beginning, we've talked a lot about not wanting the LAVA fundraising to, and I hate using this word, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of another one right now, but to cannibalize ourselves and our efforts within our own organization. So there's a lot of discussion among the coalition if, for example, we want to approach a certain foundation. And it's been, I would say, the most tricky, not surprisingly, with LA-based foundations. Many of us do get funding from, although, to be honest, of course, not all of us, So when we're applying to Mike Kelly or some other local foundation, knowing that, a handful of LAVA coalition members have relied on that funding year after year, we will collectively make a decision. Do we want to approach Mary Claire Stevens and talk to her about potentially considering LAVA? Would we be giving up the individual applications by doing that, or do we want to just let everyone keep applying individually and not go as a coalition? So in the end, it's really case by case. And as you might have seen in one of my slides, we've actually had the most success with non-LA based foundations. Some of us do get funding from Mellon. Tiger, of course, is a new foundation, so a different story there. But we also knew with some of these larger foundations that they did have the capacity to do both. And so, it's just really, we have to look at it every time and try to balance all of that.
Thank you. My question is sort of a follow-up to that and is specifically for Anne, but relevant to all of you. You talked about retraining the foundations, especially post the urgency of the pandemic. Was there, I could imagine that there would be, so my question is, was there, and how did you have to retrain yourselves as EDs to not go back to only working on your own programming and fundraising for your own programming, but really taking time out of your day to talk to fundraise not only for the network, but for capacity and for staff?
Yeah, I mean, similar.
How did you do that?
You know, it took time. I mean, we're really proud that we've raised $2.6 million, but that's taken us a good 2.5 years, you know, so it didn't happen overnight. And it has been many, many, many conversations. So it has been time consuming. But as I was mentioning earlier, I do think that the benefit of the conversations, whether they led to actual contributions or not, is sort of invaluable, because it has provided this incredible platform to just try to shift those conversations even a little bit toward, you know, what institutions really do need. As many of you probably know, I mean, one of the outcomes of the pandemic more broadly with funders has been more openness to funding general operations rather than programs. That's happened not just to LAVA, but for all of us in many cases. But that's a great example of one of the topics of conversation we could have with a lot of these funders, to keep pushing for their belief, not just in our institutions, but in our staff, to make decisions for ourselves and to play a smaller role in sort of dictating where funds go. And I do think that we see some of them already going back to the programmatic funding while they had shifted maybe for a couple of years. But some of them aren't. They're continuing, or they're adding general operating grants in addition to other things. So, you know, I would say that, you know, each of our organizations, of course, has their fundraising challenges and needs for the year, and it has been difficult to some degree to balance doing both. But I think that fundamentally, I've talked to more funders, you know, through LAVA, and also that gives them an introduction in some cases, or just a deeper knowledge in others of ICA. So it really is a positive in both directions, I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we have time for one or two more questions, but go ahead.
Many of you are working with, higher education in addition to the museum spaces, so you're interacting with students and hearing about mental health struggles. Historically and maybe stereotypically, a lot of successful, well-known artists have battled mental illness and substance abuse, and they are processing a lot of community expectation and societal trauma. How do each of you see the museum or curator's role to the health and well-being of today's artists and art professionals? And maybe that's not a quick answer, but
I think, Virginia, you did touch on it, being that you are affiliated in an art school, but do you want to elaborate?
Yeah. You know, so much of the work that we do is really project-based. So it's inviting artists in, having them respond to our spaces and what's happening in their world, their lives, our world, and really letting it all, you know, manifest in the way that makes sense for them connecting to our community. So I think it's important, more important than ever, to allow maximum freedom and as many resources as we possibly can, and connect artists to different communities and different groups and different resources locally and regionally that can help them, sort of boost the signal for what they're trying to express. So that, I think, is, increasingly important for us to do.
I would say this is maybe a little bit adjacent of an answer to your really important question, but Two things. One is that at MCA Denver, the focus of our education programs are on teenagers, and identifying them specifically because, well, we don't have the resources to support all different ages, but also just recognizing the similarities between teenagers and artists in terms of bucking convention, trying to figure things out for themselves personally as well as creatively, and so many other ways in which there's similarities. And so inevitably, if you're invested in the, supporting teens, supporting their mental health and the programs that we do as a way of both being a space where we can talk about these things as well as practice and have a number of opportunities for just coming together in person or virtually, but really just being the place where for a lot of the teens who have gone through our programs, they have shared that just being able to connect with others from across the city who they otherwise would not have come into contact with, that's been one of the great kind of benefits of being a part of the museum. So that's one thing. And then I would say separately, one of the things that we're really excited about at the holiday is that it is also a platform for us to be able to provide a lot more kind of services for artists and creatives. And again, we are not there yet, but this is the long-term vision of being able, a number of sessions on like practical life, like how do you file taxes as an artist? It's like so complicated, and very few places kind of walk you through what that means. And then on a kind of another end of the spectrum is therapeutic services and whatever that might invite. But I think at the heart of it, it's really about building a community that will share with us what is needed, and what would be helpful, what would be impactful, and for us to just be on the listening end of a lot of that, and to have the space and the opportunity to be able to kind of capture that information and then iterate from there.
I think there was just one last question we can.
Thank you so much. So I think all of you have in some ways acknowledged the labor of building relationships. And I'm curious to hear the labor of building relationships along with the support and care for community and the people within your organization. So I'm curious to hear what are some of the most salient takeaways that you've found as you've introduced new training, support for staff members within your organizations? What have they most needed or benefited from as really embracing this idea that people are, of course, the interface between the museum and the world?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm particularly wrestling with right now, and how, we're all trained and we go and we study art and we study art history and we study museum education, but then we get in the room with teenagers and we find that we are not equipped for where they are right now. And it's very difficult for staff. It's very emotional. I really think about my leadership style as leading with empathy, and I really want that to be, diffused and embedded and, drunk up in our institution. But oftentimes the more empathetic people are the more porous, and they take on so much. And so a lot of the work that we're doing with our partners is finding help for our staff so that they are trained, equipped, know when they need to tap out, know when they need to bring someone else in, and then know when they need to call for additional support, particularly around teenagers, with a lot of the things I think our frontline staff and our educators are hearing. And it's a challenging time, but I think the more resources we can coalesce and the more we can be really honest about what we are really poised to do as museums, what's really our role, and then where do we need to find community partners to help us and maybe step out of a place where it isn't really our role. So it's an ongoing thing, and I welcome anyone who wants to kind of talk and think about it.
I think we don't have time for any other responses. That was great. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. And please thank our panelists.